Hey, what's going on, folks? It's Mike here, and welcome to the next lesson in our C++ series. In this lesson, I'm going to be revisiting multiple inheritance. Now, multiple inheritance can be a little bit of a trickier technique to use, so generally, folks are going to shy away from it. In fact, in the last video, I encouraged folks to really think carefully about when you use multiple inheritance. That said, it can be a technique that has some use cases, and if you want to look at the previous video in this series, I did show at least one use case where it might be useful to use multiple inheritance, just so when folks say don't use it at all, you at least have one thing you can say, well, what about this scenario? That said, I do want to talk about and revisit multiple inheritance and give us a tool for how we can also properly use multiple inheritance in a scenario. So let's go ahead and look at some code here. So what I've gone ahead and done is written some code here on the left. And I want you to just take just a moment to draw out the inheritance hierarchy on a piece of paper, or just think about what this is. Now, I've tried to be kind to you in how I have laid out this code so that you can see how it works. Okay, so with this said, hopefully you paused the video and did a little exercise here for drawing this out. So let's go ahead and go through this. So if I just kind of label this out here, I have an entity, that's what's at the top here, and it looks like warrior is derived from entity. So let me draw that as neatly as possible. Here I have a warrior, and I also have goblin, which is derived from warrior. So this is a goblin, and then our player is derived from both of these classes. Okay. So we have our player here. So let's just go ahead and think about this. Let's think about if this is the right inheritance hierarchy for the actual code that's shown here, and then we can go ahead and proceed. So the first thing I want to do is just go ahead and create an instance of Mike here and just see if, well, Mike.x and Mike.y can be accessed because, well, we seem to have one copy of that here in entity. So in fact here, I should have X and Y here, and then I should be able to access this up through our inheritance hierarchy. Now, if I go ahead and compile this, it looks like X is ambiguous. But how could this be ambiguous? I thought, looking at our inheritance hierarchy here, that we only had one copy here. Well, that's where what's on the left here is actually wrong here. Or at least it's not representative of what we've actually done in C++. So that's where I'm going to have to add this idea of virtual inheritance, which we'll do on this side here, virtual inheritance, to fix this problem. Because what we've actually done here on this left side here, and actually let me go ahead and just correct this here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this, and in fact, just redo this where I have entity, and I'll go ahead and move this here, and warriors derived from it. And then goblin itself has no other knowledge about warriors, so why would it be on the same inheritance hierarchy? So it's on its own sort of chain here, right? And if I sort of just approach it this way, then maybe this makes a little bit more sense. And then player is down here. Okay, so player gets derived from each of these. And if I just go ahead and label what's at line 4 here, I have an X and a Y here and an X and a Y here. Okay, so let's go ahead and just fix the code to show what's actually going on here. So if I want to actually make use of these things, what I've got to do here is go and access, well, the actual X that I want here. So in this case, I would have warrior, and then in X, that's part of that scope. And let's go ahead and do warrior and something like this. And then I would have to do the same thing for our goblin. So let's go ahead and fix that here. Goblin. And I'll go ahead and repeat that here for goblin. Okay, so now let's go ahead and give this a compile, and I'll run it, and we can see that this works here. Okay, now they happen to both have the same value here, but again, here is the X and the Y value from our warrior, and then likewise from our goblin, because again, here is the actual inheritance hierarchy that is reflected. Okay, so now you're saying, Mike, this is cool. I guess I understand how this is, but I can see how this could be confusing. And even worse, from maybe a performance standpoint, if you want to think about this, we have duplicate X and Y when we probably just mean, if we're especially using X and Y is just storing positions, for instance, we don't need to duplicate these values. There's nothing really meaningful from them. And in fact, what about this power value here? Okay, so let's go ahead and look at that here. So if I go ahead and uncomment this and run, well, again, we have the same problem here. Power is ambiguous, so we have to do the same exercise. So allowing to just do this for the goblin, just to show one example. And now it's not ambiguous because I've been super explicit here. Okay, so maybe that's fine, or maybe we want to figure out how to derive one of these values here for power. Power, in fact, is going to remain ambiguous, so I'm just going to comment this out. Okay, so what I want to talk about, though, in this lesson is this idea of virtual inheritance. Inheritance here. Okay, and just to give a little helper here, here's the Wikipedia page, which I think is useful here, but we really want this sort of diagram above here showing the diamond inheritance problem. And many folks will know this as the dreaded diamond inheritance because it can cause ambiguity. But what we really want, or are trying to do, and maybe you did this when you drew it, is we have an entity, and it has an X and Y, and then a warrior here, and a goblin, and when we have a player, then we get this relationship here. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how we can fix this. Okay, so we can get this actual diamond pattern. Now again, the diamond pattern can be a little bit tricky because there can be ambiguous calls, right? Warrior and goblin still share the same power variable. So I'll show you how to resolve that again, but let's see if we can get rid of this X and Y. Now, the actual tool for doing this is to tell the C++ compiler how to handle this inheritance here. So in order to do that, we have to make our inheritance or specify how we're doing the inheritance and make it virtual here. Okay, so let me go ahead and just type virtual here and virtual. And well, we got to think about what the order is here. Let's just go ahead and give that a compile, see if it works, and it does. Now, this still works because, again, we're being very specific about where we are getting X and Y from here. So let's see if I remove this here. So let's go ahead and remove this and just say Mike.y and Mike.x here. Okay, so if I compile, well, voila, now it works now. Now I can actually just run this program here and it just works. Because now goblin and warrior from this derived class will point to the same X and Y here, okay? So in a sense, what the virtual keyword is doing, and I'll highlight this in the Wikipedia article because it says it nicely, is to actually just merge all of the member variables. So in this first sentence, technique that ensures that only one copy of a base class's member variables are inherited. Okay, now this one might actually be worth looking at in GDB just to go ahead and prove that this works. I'm going to recompile this with debugging symbols, and let's just go ahead and crack open GDB. I'll use the source view here, and let's just go ahead and put a breakpoint at line 22, run the program, and I'm just going to print off Mike here, and we can go ahead and see the actual data that is stored here. And here I can actually see when printing off this object here, Mike, that we have an entity here. That's the actual X and the Y that I'm pointing to right here. Okay, now we still have power here that is being stored, the goblin version of that, and then the warrior version as well. Okay, now let me go ahead and just rewind. Again, I think that's a fun experiment that if I don't have virtual here, just to go ahead and rerun this by recompiling with GDB, do the same experiment here, put a breakpoint, say at line 22, run, print off Mike here, and then we can go ahead and see that our entries here, and I'll have to scoot over a little bit, that there's an entry for our warrior here that has an X and a Y position, as well as the next line up here, the goblin. So you can see on these two lines here that I have multiple X's and Y's, and that was not the case in the previous iteration. Okay, so just a cool experiment so you can actually see it and visualize what's going on here using GDB here. Okay, so let me go ahead and get us to back to our reasonable states here, recompile, rerun with GDB one last time here, put in a breakpoint, run our program, and print off Mike here. Again, just so that you can see, in this case, it looks like it just grabbed the entity X and Y from Goblin, and then it said, that's enough here. That's how the compiler decided to choose. Now, why people may not like, in a sense, multiple inheritance for this reason is, why did it take the Goblin X and the Y? Well, usually that's just because, Goblin came first here. In fact, let's go ahead and see if we can get if I change the order of these, if it takes warrior, the X and the Y. Okay, so I'll recompile, rerun, put in our breakpoint, run, print off Mike, and this time it looks like, well, we are getting the warrior here, X and the Y. So there is some ordering here that seems to make sense here. But to some folks, it could seem non-deterministic, or maybe they don't know when they're creating the object and, one or the other shows up here. Okay, so one last outstanding issue here. Again, what about this line here, the power? Okay, so if I go ahead and just do Mike.power, did this get fixed here? Okay, so if I compile this, again, it's ambiguous. So let's try the same experiment here and try to do virtual and virtual here. Okay, so will it perform this sort of merging of variables when our derived class, player here, has two base classes, warrior in this case, with shared variables of the same type? So I'll try to compile. And oops, let me make sure I save here. Do this experiment again. Well, again, let me just take a closer look here at the wiki page here. And again, this is only going to work here when I have this scenario here where I have class B and C, which are deriving from some class A. That's where things can get merged. So again, just to look at our scenario here, where I have this scenario here. If I have something that shows up in both of these here, power and power, it's still ambiguous here because, again, we're trying to derive this class here, and we're not able to eliminate these duplicates. Now, if I had stuff up further in the hierarchy here, for instance, like another base entity class that was being derived from, then we could successfully merge those. Okay, so that's the idea here. That's why we're still going to get this ambiguous power here that belongs to warrior and to goblin. So again, this is probably also a good warning to us when creating this actual player class here, that we're deriving two very similar classes here. So we would want to think about what we're actually doing here, because maybe, again, goblins and warriors are a little bit too related, or maybe this power thing doesn't really belong here. Maybe that should be, again, in a class that's above. Or, as we've learned about in previous lessons, maybe this is something that should be a series of attributes that we compose our objects of. Anyway, just a few different things to think about and some strategies. So if you do want to go ahead and fix this, again, we would have to be specific and say Mike.goblin, and then the scope here, operator, the power here, just so we have something that compiles here. Okay, so folks, I hope that was interesting. I hope that was another useful lesson on multiple inheritance and just inheritance in general, and to understand a little bit more about this diamond inheritance pattern that can sometimes cause problems. But now you have a tool, and now if you see in the wild the virtual keyword that is used in relation to virtual inheritance, you'll understand a little bit what's going on, or maybe what the developer's intent was. All right, folks, so if you found this useful or if you have questions, feel free to comment below. Go ahead and give this video a like if you found it was useful or maybe just a new concept that you learned about. And go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. And that way we can make sure that we see you in the next video. All right, take care, folks, and thank you for your time.